Hola a todos. Antes que nada, antes de comenzar, quiero agradecer a la gente de Secnesys por haber hecho este evento posible. Entonces, pues muchas gracias a todos. Y también quiero extender el agradecimiento a pues todos y cada uno de ustedes, ¿no? Que se dieron cita el día de hoy aquí para darnos aforo, ¿no? Y escuchar lo que tenemos para ustedes. Yo también he estado de este lado de la silla, ¿no? Cuando me toca escuchar algo. Entonces, honestamente, a mí me gusta llevarme algo, ¿no? A mi casa, me gusta llevarme algo a mi lugar para pensarlo, ¿no? Entonces, por eso está en que hoy no vamos a presentar nada de rThreat, hoy no vamos a presentar nada de producto. Lo que vamos a presentar el día de hoy es algo totalmente diferente que tiene que ver totalmente con la parte de ciberseguridad y que espero que a ustedes, pues, les haga sentido, ¿no? Les retroalimente de algún modo. Mi nombre es Jesús Garcia, yo soy el CTO de rThreat, soy el creador de la plataforma. Entre otras cosas, escribo código fuente, hago malware específico, documento, hago testeo, QA, hago de todo, ¿no? Y el día de hoy vamos a hablar precisamente del comportamiento de los adversarios. ¿Por qué es importante hablar de esto? Es muy importante porque, bueno, vamos a hacer honor al viejo epitafio, ¿no? Que versa para poder defender, pues hay que conocer a tu enemigo, ¿no? O sea, a tus amigos cerca y a tus enemigos más cerca, ¿no? Entonces, por eso está en que es importante cuando hablamos de resiliencia, cuando hablamos de estándares de cero trust, etcétera, pues es necesario conocer al adversario, ¿no? No podemos pelear con alguien que no conocemos. Entonces, durante los próximos 28 minutos y 30 segundos vamos a hablar exactamente de eso. Vamos a analizar un poco el conocimiento y el comportamiento de estos adversarios y vamos a aprender un poco más de ellos. Para ello, he desarrollado la siguiente agenda. Primero vamos a ver el estado del arte y los antecedentes que existen en la ciberseguridad ofensiva. Después vamos a ver cuál es la realidad en los ciberataques. Y bueno, vamos a ver un poco de predicciones muy rápidamente en el lado ofensivo de la moneda. Y vamos a ver qué técnicas de evasión ocupan estos amiguitos, ¿no? Y después vamos a pasar una demo donde vamos a ver cómo son este tipo de ataques avanzados actualmente. Este es el estado del arte en ciberseguridad. Y aquí podríamos hablar de las estrategias de migración hacia la nube y transformación digital y que los adversarios van ganando y todo eso. Sin embargo, pues no vamos a hablar de producto el día de hoy, vamos a hablar de adversarios. Y por ello es que vamos a ver realmente cómo estos amiguitos siguen vulnerando, ¿no? Cómo siguen utilizando y reutilizando los artefactos que ya fueron encontrados en una brecha y siguen ganando, ¿no? Entonces, imaginemos que yo quiero aquí hackear el hotel, ¿no? Imaginemos que yo quiero realmente ingresar al hotel y es aquí donde yo les pido que recuerden al yo interno, ¿no? El yo que intenta atacar, ¿no? No el yo que intenta defenderse, sino el ingeniero, el profesional de seguridad que intenta atacar. ¿Cómo lo haríamos? Si yo quiero atacar el hotel, ahorita que no se conectaba a la red, pues yo no voy a buscar escanear puertos desde afuera, ¿no? Yo voy a buscar en qué nodo me puedo conectar. De hecho, aquí hay uno. Y entonces yo voy a empezar a atacar desde adentro, ¿no? Precisamente esa es la filosofía que tienen los atacantes. Un atacante no va a escanear, o sea, esa es la parte romántica de la ciberseguridad, la que estábamos acostumbrados en el 2006, 2005, con Alec One, Kevin Mitnick, Ashikawa, etcétera, pero eso ya pasó. La realidad está en que ahora existe un tema muy incómodo, ¿no? Para todas las organizaciones, que son los insiders. Ya lo decía Mark en la parte de cómo se gana acceso, ¿no? A través de una llave. Esta llave se consigue a través de los insiders. Existen dos tipos de insiders. Uno de ellos es el indirecto. El indirecto es el que se hace, el usuario neófito, ¿no? Que le da clic y que descarga algo, ¿no? El usuario que se gana a través de una campaña de ataque. Y el otro es incómodo, pero es el que se soborna. El que se soborna, pues es aquel donde, pues si yo soy un grupo de ataque, pues yo ni siquiera quiero pagar una campaña, ¿no? Para mí es más fácil encontrar una persona, pues que realmente trabaje dentro de la organización y que me dé ese acceso o que me dé ese acceso a los endpoints, ¿no? Y eso no lo digo yo, eso lo dice la historia de cómo se han vulnerado o han pasado las grandes brechas de ciberseguridad. Aquí, por ejemplo, podemos ver pues cómo realmente ellos están buscando, ¿no? Aquí podemos ver en un blog, normalmente esto se hace en los foros chan, en la parte de la dark web, cómo buscan gente que trabajen en Claro, en Telefónica, en AT&T, en Microsoft, en Apple, porque es así como ellos van a vulnerar. Ellos gastan, es más loable para ellos pagarle a un insider que está realmente haciendo toda la parte romántica de la ciberseguridad. Y si no lo encuentran, entonces ocupan estos tipos de dispositivos, ¿no? Pues mejor voy, me consigo una Raspberry Pi, una Raspberry Zero, o me busco una Udo, una Plate Panda, la pongo en un mouse, y le pago a alguien para que vaya y que conecte el mouse, y pues ya tengo una microcomputadora, ya gané un acceso allá adentro, ¿no? Y de ahí es donde yo voy a empezar a hacer el estudio de los adversarios, ¿no? Bueno, de lo que es de mi víctima, ¿no? Entonces, todos estos ataques son completamente contextualizados y son totalmente targetizados, ¿no? ¿Y quiénes son estos amiguitos? Los grupos de APT, ¿no? Todos los vendors nos dicen, es que los APT son bien malos, ¿no? Y están bien locos, ¿no? Pero pues, ¿quiénes son, no? Nunca nos explican cómo funcionan ellos. Son como empresas, realmente son como empresas, son organizaciones que van de los 30 a los 80 personas y pues tienen todas estas características, ¿no? Que no los voy a leer, mejor les cuento cómo funcionan, pues ellos están bien fundamentados, bien fundados, tienen mucho dinero detrás. Ellos además son los que forman parte de la cyberwar. Ellos son completamente profesionales, son persistentes y normalmente suelen reutilizar todas las herramientas que existen para el hacking. Y eso lo vamos a ver más adelante cuando hagamos la retrospectiva de la reingeniería que se hace a los artefactos que se recogen después de una brecha. ¿Cómo siguen utilizando lo mismo, no? Si vamos ahí, siguen utilizando Mimikatz, ¿no? Siguen utilizando Nmap, etcétera, ¿no? Mismas herramientas que se vienen utilizando desde hace años, ¿no? ¿Y por qué siguen siendo tan efectivos? Ese es ahí el problema que tienen los vendors, ¿no? La amenaza es completamente real. Aquí podemos ver los ataques más importantes del 2021. Aquí tenemos como primer lugar el Colonial Pipeline. De hecho, este fue el detonó que el Zero Trust como estándar se tenga que tomar ahora en cuenta, porque bueno, Biden le dijo preguntó pues cómo vamos a solucionar, ¿no? Vamos a pelear esto contra estos amiguitos. Entonces adoptaron el estándar del Zero Trust. Entonces, bueno, pues aquí podemos ver diferentes intrusiones, diferentes brechas, algunas con incluso costos que no pueden ser calculables, ¿no? Porque generan un artefacto, lo distribuyen en la red y lo van replicando varias veces, ¿no? Y lo van utilizando. Y bueno, pues no solo eso, ¿no? Sino que cada uno de estos ataques son completamente actualizados y totalmente focalizados. Si lo que está de moda es el COVID, pues entonces hacer campañas de COVID, ¿no? Si lo que está de moda es estar publicando fake news en la parte de los foros, pues entonces yo también publico, ¿no? Entonces el asunto es que ellos no funcionan con bots, ellos funcionan con personas que realmente están todo el tiempo ahí, escarbando y ejecutando y creando nuevas amenazas que se traducen en ataques. Aquí podemos ver incluso cómo pues les están pidiendo dinero, ¿no? Y creo que no se ve, pero bueno, esta es una conversación real de los atacantes con las víctimas pidiéndoles dinero, ¿no? La cyberwar es algo que estamos viendo y viviendo en este momento. Ahí podemos ver un screenshot. Todos los screenshots que voy a mostrar ahorita a continuación son tomados de la dark web, son completamente reales. Y bueno, algunos de ellos son incómodos, pero pues ya están aquí, ya no los puedo quitar. Entonces, esto es lo del grupo Anonymous en Liberland. Entonces ellos ahí prometieron que iban a ayudar al gobierno ucraniano, ¿no? Robando información. Pues realmente lo lograron y pues aquí podemos ver cómo pues ellos tú puedes descargar la información, ¿no? Simple y sencillamente con la URL en extensión Onion. Podemos ver cómo se utilizan incluso también este tipo de redes en la dark web para poder organizar la ciberguerra, ¿no? Ahí podemos ver este grupo de Georgia Legion y bueno, tú puedes bajarte el manual y este manual es el que realmente se utiliza la contra en Ucrania. Y entonces, pues, les dicen paso a paso, ¿no? No te tienen que ir a recoger las armas, cómo se tienen que ocultar en los edificios para poder, pues, snipear, ¿no? A los rusos, ¿no? Entonces, esto es una realidad, ¿no? Ahí podemos ver cómo se robaron los ucranianos una frecuencia de los rusos militares. Y esto es muy importante. Aquí podemos ver una noticia donde están utilizando Wiper. Wiper era un malware que se creó hace 3 años o 4 años, ya se tienen las técnicas, tácticas y procedimientos que tiene este tipo de malware, ya se tiene bien establecido, ya está bien mapeado. Sin embargo, los atacantes toman este malware, lo vuelven a modificar, vuelven a inyectar nuevas técnicas y tácticas, aplican técnicas de ofuscación tanto en las cabeceras como en los headers, vuelven a hacer el repacking, lo vuelven a reempaquetar, y entonces crean algo totalmente nuevo, ¿no? ¿Por qué hago mucho énfasis en esto? Porque ahí es donde empezamos a ver cómo funcionan los adversarios. Para el adversario, para los grupos de ataque actuales, ya no es loable estar creando algo desde cero, ¿no? Entonces, todas las veces que viene el vendor y te dice, ay, es que ellos son bien malos y crean algo desde cero, es que no es cierto. Es que ellos tienen técnicas las cuales siempre te van a estar entregando una variable de lo que realmente es la cepa original. Y eso lo vamos a ver un poco más adelante, ¿no? Aquí esto es importante, esta es una estadística de cómo iba el ransomware. Y aquí podemos ver que Ucrania, pues antes no estaba, ¿no? Y el 24 de febrero, pues ya aparece. Esto es porque actualmente la ciberguerra es más factible que estar atacando. Cosas que tampoco dicen, ¿no? Por ejemplo, ¿por qué caen los misiles en Ucrania, ¿no? Se supone que tienen batería antiaérea. Actualmente es más factible atacar cibernéticamente la batería antiaérea atacarla con un ransomware, dejarla fuera de uso, que está la bombardeando, ¿no? Entonces, pues esto es real, ¿no? Y esto no solamente es en el ámbito de ciberguerra, ¿no? Sino que en todos los ámbitos. Aquí tenemos una noticia del 2020, donde un paciente se murió. O sea, un hospital fue objetivo de un ransomware. El ransomware sacó de control todas las máquinas. Llegó el enfermo, no lo pudieron atender y pues, pum, que se muere, ¿no? Entonces, realmente la amenaza nos compete a todos, ¿no? No solamente a naciones, no solamente a organizaciones muy grandes. Y es aquí donde viene otro punto, ¿no? Bueno, pues para que yo pueda hacer amenaza avanzada, yo tengo que ser un genio, ¿no? Yo tengo que saber programar y tengo que saber hacer muchas cosas. La realidad está en que no. La realidad está en que hay ransomware as a service. Entonces aquí podemos ver a Ranion. Ranion es un grupo de ataque que precisamente te da eso, ¿no? No se alcanza a ver, pero bueno, aquí están los precios, ¿no? Entonces por $900, ustedes ya tienen ahí un ransomware que pueden distribuir pues, en sus oficinas, ¿no? Que les pueden distribuir en sus oficinas. Y entonces aquí la pregunta es, si esto ya se conoce y además tienen el cinismo de ponerlo y ofrecerlo, ponerle hasta un número, ¿por qué los vendors no lo pueden detener? ¿Por qué los vendors, a pesar de que tienen mapeado todas las técnicas y tácticas que estos utilizan, por qué siguen siendo tan dañinos? Bueno, pues es simple, ¿no? Ellos pueden tener el código fuente de su aplicación, de su malware, que al final de cuentas es una aplicación que crearon, y entonces ellos empiezan a modificar técnicas y tácticas específicas en diferentes partes. Si yo, por ejemplo, quisiera crear uno, y bueno, tampoco soy tan bueno para crearlo desde cero, entonces puedo comprar uno. Aquí tenemos una noticia, esto no es una noticia, esto es un foro real, donde puedes comprar el Dharma Ransomware, está escrito en C y C++, por $2,000. Es decir, yo puedo ir, depositar $2,000, ya tengo mis 40,000 pesitos menos, pero bueno, yo ya tengo un ransomware, el cual puedo hacerlo completamente desconocido. Es un día cero, al final de cuentas, ¿no? Tiene técnicas y tácticas completamente conocidas, pero es desconocido para todos los demás. ¿Cómo lo haces? Tú cambias la llave de inscripción, cambias el algoritmo, quizás es un RCA 128, lo cambio a 256, ¡pum! Ya tengo uno completamente nuevo. Y esto es completamente real. El grupo Abaddon, su base es Dharma. El grupo Abaddon era un grupo tan cínico que lo que hacía es que te decía, bueno, pues ya te vulneré, aquí está tu información y si no me pagas en 15 días, pues yo expongo tu información, ¿no? Así fue como se le pegaron a la Lotería Nacional. Y entonces, pues ya ponen ahí la información, pues ya te la puedes bajar después de los 15 días, ¿no? Entonces, la amenaza es completamente real y tiene motivaciones muy exactas. Cuando hablamos de las predicciones, no voy a leer las que están en verde porque esas son las completamente defensivas. Vamos a irnos a las que están en rojo. Las que están en rojo hablan de cómo va a evolucionar esta manera de generar malware de los adversarios. La realidad está en que toda la industria estaba avanzando a utilizar machine learning. Entonces seríamos muy ingenuos si pues nosotros no pensáramos que también ellos van a avanzar al machine learning, ¿no? Y de hecho ya lo hemos visto. Todas las veces que estamos ahí con nuestro celular, ¿no? Y que decimos, mira, esta aplicación es para ver cómo me veo de mujer, ¿no? Entonces ahí te tomas tu foto, ¿no? Y, mira, me veo bien guapa, ¿no? Bueno, pues ahí pues ya te metiste tú solo, ¿no? ¿Por qué? Pues porque la aplicación, cuando te la bajas en sí, no es maliciosa. Pero cuando la aplicación empieza a detectar la interacción con el ser humano, o sea, cuando yo agarro mi teléfono, no manches, me veo bien bonita, ¿no? Y le doy clic y me tomo la foto, la aplicación ya sabe que está teniendo interacción con un humano completamente real. Entonces ahí cuando va a empezar a liberar el código malicioso, y lo que liberaba era un minador de bitcoins, ¿no? Entonces, eso ya, este machine learning en la parte de las aplicaciones, en la parte de los adversarios, ya lo hemos visto. Lo que pasa es que pues no está muy difundido, ¿no? Y bueno, también van a aumentar toda la parte de automatización para los movimientos laterales. Y la pregunta aquí es, ¿y cómo se protegen hoy las organizaciones, ¿no? Entonces, ustedes que son CISOs, que están encargados de toda la parte de ciberseguridad, pues aquí les va a hacer sentido todo el stack de soluciones, ¿no? Todo empieza por un EPP y termina hasta donde tenemos un EDR que está basado aquí. Termina con un EDR que está basado en Machine Learning, comportamiento, IOCs, BOCs, etcétera. Sandboxing, cuando todo esto está correlacionado, pues ya hablamos de que se tiene un SIEM. Y bueno, pues hasta ahí decimos, bueno, pues ya está totalmente protegido, ¿no? ¿Cómo validamos que todo esto funcione? Pues a través de pentesting y evaluaciones independientes o estandarizadas, ¿no? Es aquí donde entraría rThreat, pero no es la plática adecuada, así que voy a avanzar. Entonces, bueno, cuando estos amiguitos toman toda la telemetría que pudieron obtener de una intrusión, es como actualmente se conoce al adversario. Ellos toman la brecha, ellos toman todos los artefactos, llámese un artefacto, todo malware o pieza, muestra de malware que fue exitosa durante una intrusión. Entonces toman el artefacto, le aplican ingeniería en reversa y lo que hacen es que empiezan a obtener cada una de estas soluciones y las empiezan a estandarizar en diferentes frameworks. Llámese Mitre, llámese Attack Lifecycle, llámese Cyber Kill Chain, etc. Y es así como se tiene, ¿no? Al final lo que vamos a tener es un mapa de aplicaciones en cada una de las fases. El problema, y que también es penoso incluso para mí aceptarlo, pues es que estamos un paso atrás de ellos, ¿no? O sea, nosotros estamos analizando el pasado, estamos analizando el proceso creativo que un grupo de personas tuvieron para atacar de forma exitosa a una organización, y nosotros estamos leyendo ese pasado, ¿no? Entonces tratamos de leer el futuro con base en lo que conocemos del pasado. Aquí el asunto es de que es importante conocer al adversario para saber qué es lo que va a hacer. Es importante conocer sus motivaciones. Y es aquí donde vamos a ver otra parte importante, ¿no? Los adversarios conocen todas las ciberdefensas. Eso es triste, pero pues es la realidad, ¿no? Entonces aquí podemos observar, este es un ejemplo de cómo se protege pues el asset más importante, que es el endpoint, ¿no? Es ahí donde se monetiza un ataque. Entonces, ellos todos saben perfectamente que, bueno, sí, existen varios tipos de ejecutables, adaptativos, el scripting, la parte de los que están en .NET, los que son todo el mix de estos amiguitos, y aquí tenemos los diferentes escáneres que detectan cada uno de ellos. Al final de cuentas, pues eso lo sé, pues ellos también lo saben, ¿no? Entonces ellos generan exactamente artefactos a la medida que son capaces de evadir esa seguridad que es provista por un EDR. De tal forma que aquí hace completamente sentido a lo que decíamos al inicio de la conversación, ¿no? No se puede evitar un paciente cero. ¿Cómo lo hacen, no? Ellos cómo realmente están pensando en cómo hacer este malware, ¿no? Ellos funcionan como una empresa. Entonces, bueno, aquí podemos ver las diferentes fases. Ellos empiezan con una planeación, empiezan con qué los motiva a atacar. Se tienen que robar una patente, les pagaron para exfiltrar información que incluye patentes e información de desarrollo específico. ¿Qué es lo que los motiva? Tienen una motivación porque recordemos que están bien fundados, tienen dinero detrás, estudian a la víctima, empiezan con la planeación de los movimientos laterales y después pasan a cómo va a ser el trigger inicial. Después empiezan con el desarrollo del artefacto, ¿no? Esta es la parte técnica y es la parte que, bueno, no podemos ahondar más ahí, pero es ahí donde ellos empiezan a modificar, toman los artefactos que ya existen, los decompilan, no tienen el código fuente, muchas veces tienen el código fuente y ahí es donde empiezan a introducir diferentes técnicas y tácticas. Casi todo esto está desarrollado en C++, en C, etcétera. Y después pasan a la ejecución. Esta es la parte importante, porque es aquí donde tiene que ver el insider. Nada está hecho ni nada está ejecutado por casualidad. Siempre hay un día D, siempre hay una planeación completamente establecida. Y es ahí donde cuando ellos ya saben qué día van a ejecutar, normalmente le dicen al insider, ¿sabes qué? Tú renuncias hoy y yo ataco en 3 días, ¿no? Ese es como el comportamiento que ellos tienen. El insider normalmente es el que encargado de distribuir todos los artefactos y poder garantizar que la infección va a llegar al mayor punto, a la mayor cantidad de endpoints posible, ¿no? En los bancos, por ejemplo, siempre hay insiders, a mí me consta, siempre hay insiders en donde se genera la gold image de los cajeros electrónicos, de los ATM. Siempre va por ahí el ataque. O sea, no es nada romántico, es algo de hecho más feo, ¿no? Que romántico. Y bueno, después de que ya se ejecuta el ataque, pues ya se mueven de forma lateral, hacen su plan de persistencia y monetizan el ataque, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, pues, ¿qué sería una presentación si yo no les enseño cómo son estos ataques de nueva generación? Entonces, para ello, he preparado una máquina virtual, que ya se pausó, ahorita la vamos a volver. No, está. Entonces, bueno, para ello, aquí tenemos una máquina virtual. Esta máquina virtual es completamente funcional y les voy a enseñar. Aquí podemos ver, salió la que no quería, este es de los bonis. Entonces, bueno, sabemos que la máquina está funcional, ¿no? Funciona perfectamente y está protegida por Trendmicro. No tengo nada contra ellos, honestamente es que pues, es lo que nos compraron, entonces pues, hay que sacarle jugo, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, esta máquina se encuentra completamente protegida. Voy a mostrarles, imaginemos que yo quiero atacar, ¿no? Yo realmente quiero vulnerar esta máquina y quiero tratar de moverme de forma lateral. Entonces, bueno, yo aquí tengo 4 archivos. Imaginemos que aquí tengo un emulador, y todos conocemos el Nintendo, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, pues yo voy a ejecutarlo. Imaginemos que empiezo a distribuir esta muestra a través de la red, a través de USB, en una campaña, hago una plumita que tenga muy bonita y el USB y, te doy un emulador, ¿no? Entonces, pues los usuarios son muy cautivos, ¿no? Entonces ellos que dicen, no, pues sí, está padrísimo, ¿no? Yo sí quiero, ¿no? Entonces, pues aquí tenemos un emulador muy sencillo, ¿no? Entonces, como pueden ver, no está pasando nada en este momento a pesar de que yo ya lo ejecuté. Voy a cargar un ROM. De hecho, cargué estos nada más porque fueron los más fáciles de encontrar. Ahorita va a empezar a cargar. Y vamos a ver que no va a pasar nada. ¿Por qué no pasa nada? No pasa nada porque este programa lo que tiene la particularidad de que está esperando la interacción con el usuario. Tiene el mismo principio que platicamos de le tomo una foto y me veo cómo estoy de mujer, ¿no? O bueno, mejor de viejito, ¿no? Entonces, tiene el mismo principio. Ahorita lo que está haciendo es que toma una línea base y después de esa línea base empieza a explorar si alguien está jugando o no a través de entropía. Como yo no estoy jugando, no encuentra que existe una interacción con el usuario, pues no pasa nada. Ahora bien, voy a jugar. Es muy rápido, no crean que voy a jugar aquí una hora. Entonces, bueno, aquí voy a poner el Mario, creo que eso es como el más común de Nintendo. Entonces, ahora voy a empezar a jugar. La línea base se toma en 5 segundos a 7 segundos de que alguien realmente empieza a jugar. ¿Qué es jugar? Pues es darle arriba, abajo, izquierda, derecha. Eso es jugar Mario, ¿no? Entonces, yo ahorita estoy empezando a jugar Mario y en cualquier momento va a empezar a liberar el código malicioso. Ahí podemos observar que ya empezó a liberar el código malicioso. ¿Qué fue lo que pasó? Este tipo de malware mantiene el mismo principio de inteligencia artificial, de machine learning, que mantienen los SIEM. ¿Qué es lo que hace un SIEM? Un SIEM empieza a tomar todos los puntos que se encuentran en una media y todos esos puntos que empiezan a generar un patrón se llaman entropía. Los correlaciona y entonces dice, mira, este comportamiento no está calificado, ¿no? Esto es algo malo, ¿no? Eso mismo es lo que está pasando aquí, pero desde el punto de vista malicioso. Tomó líneas bases, tomó la entropía, y entonces cuando detectó que yo empecé a jugar, pues entonces liberó el shellcode malicioso, que en este caso pues es un encriptador. Ahorita se está tardando porque está haciendo el callback hacia afuera y no prendí el servidor de callback porque si no se me mueve lateralmente. Entonces, por eso está tardando un poco en terminar la infección. Y bueno, aquí podemos ver que para Trail Micro pues sí hubo problema, ¿no? Dice que hay 4 archivos que son maliciosos, ¿no? Y uno de ellos se llamaba virus.exe, no sé si lo vieron. Una de las técnicas de evasión es yo pongo virus.exe, yo lo ocupo y yo lo pongo directamente en un registro en Windows para mantener la persistencia. Y entonces eso hace que, como los antivirus normales, que no son heurísticos, ponen toda la atención ahí, mientras todo el shellcode malicioso se inyecta directamente en la memoria. Y eso pues, se los puedo enseñar, ¿no? Aquí tengo código fuente, creo que no se ve. Catálogo grande. Pues aquí está. Esta es la piña, como se dice, ¿no? Yo lo que hago está en que generamos se genera este virus.exe, y este virus.exe, ¿qué hace Trail Micro? Hay algo malicioso. Mientras hay algo malicioso de un lado, se ataca la memoria del otro y se hace un ataque tipo fileless que encripta completamente la máquina. Este tipo de ataques es lo que se está viendo actualmente, ¿no? Y esta es la manera en la cual un adversario en realidad puede vulnerar pues un EPP, aun cuando se encuentra pues protegido, ¿no? Por un EPP tradicional o un EDR. Por eso está en que al principio de la conferencia decía, ¿no? Es que no se puede evitar el paciente cero. No se puede. Lo que se puede es evitar que esto sea una brecha, ¿no? ¿Qué fue lo que vimos en esta demostración? Vamos a ponernos acá. Vimos realmente el flujo de un ataque orquestado o ejecutado en una campaña de ransomware. Todos los vendors dicen esto, pero nadie les enseña, ¿no? Cómo realmente funcionan. Entonces, es así como funcionan. Se recibe el trigger. El trigger normalmente puede ser recibido a través de un insider directo, un insider indirecto, puede ser por spam. Después de eso, el trigger busca el malware malicioso o lo termina de descargar, lo ejecuta, libera el shellcode malicioso a través de diferentes técnicas y tácticas, como la que vimos ahorita en este momento. El código cifra toda la máquina y se empiezan a realizar los callbacks, ¿no? Que son los que le dicen hacia dónde se tiene que mover, avisa que ya se encuentra vulnerada la máquina, etc. El endpoint queda completamente comprometido y bueno, pues el pago es requerido, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, pues aquí la moraleja es, hay que saber cómo funciona el adversario realmente para poder defendernos. En rThreat nosotros proporcionamos artefactos y proporcionamos samples de día cero, como los que acabamos de ver ahora mismo, replicando en realidad las técnicas, tácticas y procedimientos para realmente validar que el stack de ciberseguridad realmente funciona de forma adecuada o como les dijo el vendor que tenía que funcionar, ¿no? Eso es lo que hacemos. Es importante también recalcar que, bueno, la prueba que acabamos de ver ahorita es completamente agnóstica. La realidad está en que yo no tengo nada contra Trail Micro, eso es lo que tenía ahí, entonces lo utilizamos. Y bueno, pues eso es todo lo que tenía para ustedes el día de hoy. Pues, muchas gracias.
John, thank you very much to be here. Thank you for joining us. John is going to talk about the Zero Trust, of course. And thank you, John. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about how you can win the cyber war with zero trust. And we're all in the same cyber war. And I'm getting some feedback from the internal microphone or something. Some other audio system is on. If you could just check quickly. But we're all in the same cyber war. And there's a reason for this. And it's called the internet, right? The internet has made the earth flat. We all live in the same bad neighborhood. There are no suburbs on the internet. And so we are all fighting the same cyber war. And this cyber war is important to the future of the entire world. There are only three adversarial businesses: the military, law enforcement, and cybersecurity. So you may work at a company that, sells a product, and that company may have competitors. But within the company, if you are a cybersecurity professional, you have adversaries. And those adversaries could be anything from, a single individual just kind of goofing around to a nation state making a specific attack on your organization. So when we talk about zero trust, we need to go back 12 years or so to this report called No More Chewy Centers, Introducing the Zero Trust Model of Information Security. I could have never imagined where zero trust would have gone to when this report came out. In fact, when it came out, a lot of people made fun of me. It was a lot of people thought I was completely insane, and maybe I was. But last year, it was kind of validated because the President of the United States, Joe Biden, issued an executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity. And in this executive order, he mandated that the federal government must adopt security best practices and advance towards a zero trust architecture. I could have never imagined in 11 years that we would go from a few people in a speech hearing me talk about this to an international movement that is mandated by the President of the United States. So it's very gratifying to have had that happen. And I wish I could be there in Mexico with you. It just wasn't possible this trip, but perhaps sometime in the future, I'll be able to come down and visit you in person. Now, a lot of people are confused about what zero trust is. So let's talk about it from my perspective as the creator of it and the person who's done the most work in it. And I call this authentic zero trust. This is zero trust without any vendor spin on it. And so zero trust, first and foremost, is a strategy. This word strategy is going to be really important, as you'll see. It is a strategy designed to stop data breaches and other cyber attacks from being successful. Now, we can't actually stop all these cyber attacks from happening because that's determined by the will of the attacker. But what we can do is make sure that those cyber attacks are not successful. And that is kind of a mind shift for a lot of people. We want to stop the data breaches. We want to stop successful cyber attacks. Now, there are design principles that I'm going to talk to you about today that have been proven to work for more than a decade. There's a reason that the President of the United States issued this executive order, and that's because it works, and the U.S. government knows it works because the U.S. government has, with my help, deployed innumerable zero trust environments over the course of the past decade. There's a standard 5-step methodology for implementing a zero trust architecture. If you follow that methodology, you will be successful. If you don't follow that methodology, you will not be successful. I have a friend who's a former soldier, and if you ask him what his favorite weapon is, he says a map. And everybody looks at him. A map is a weapon? And he says, absolutely. Because there's two things you can be in the world. You can be wrong or you can be lost. He says, I've been both. But I'd rather be wrong than lost. Because if I have a map, if I'm wrong, I can look at the map and figure out how to get where I need to go. But if I'm lost and I don't have a map, I'm in real trouble. So this is your map for implementing zero trust. And then it provides demonstrable positive security outcomes for companies who deploy these zero trust environments. So there are some misconceptions that we need to start off with. First of all, people think zero trust means making a system trusted, and that is absolutely not true. We're not trying to make a system trusted. We are trying to eliminate the concept of trust. And I'll go into that in more detail in a moment. Secondly, zero trust is about identity. Again, this is false. Zero trust consumes identity. It isn't equal to identity. And this is a mantra that's been taken up by identity vendors because, well, of course, whatever you sell in the marketplace, you want that to equal the new buzzword, zero trust. And zero trust is actually not a product at all. There are no zero trust products, right? There are products that work well in zero trust environments and products that work poorly, but there's no magic button that you can push to get this thing called zero trust because, of course, it's a strategy, not a product. And then finally, zero trust is complicated. No, if you follow that 5-step model, you'll find it's enormously easy and much easier than what you're doing today. So when I was tasked by figuring out where cybersecurity needed to go when I was an analyst at Forrester, starting in 2008, I realized that what was missing from cybersecurity was the concept of strategic engagement. We weren't thinking strategically. Now, there are 4 levels of strategic engagement. The first is grand strategy, or the ultimate goal that any entity needs to achieve. In order to understand the grand strategy for your organization, you need to know who the grand strategic actors are and what they want to have accomplished. So for most companies, the grand strategic actors are the CEO, the president, members of boards of directors, those kinds of things. Next, we have strategy. Strategy is the big idea that's used to achieve that ultimate goal. And strategy bridges tactics, which are the things we use, the stuff. One of my mentors taught me 25 years ago when he was teaching me about strategy that almost everyone in the world confuses strategy and tactics, and that is absolutely true in cybersecurity. People think they're being strategic, but really they're being tactical. And then the 4th level that's often left off is the operations. How do we use the things that we have in order to execute on the big idea to achieve that ultimate goal? These 4 levels of engagement must work together if we're going to be successful. If they aren't working together, you will not be successful. And that's why most cybersecurity programs don't work, because they don't have a strategic and grand strategic vision to grab hold of. Now, when we're fighting this cyber war, this works perfectly to look at it. And this is all derived from military strategy, by the way. So the grand strategy is to stop data breaches. Now, we all know that data fuels modern economies, but we need to understand this word breach. Breach doesn't mean what we think it means. We tend to think of somebody breached our network. They got in, they're starting to look around and poke around. No, that's the definition of an intrusion. Someone intrudes upon your system when they get in and start to look around. A breach has been defined for us by legal and regulatory entities like GDPR or CCPA or PCI. And they all say that the breach happens when data that is sensitive or regulated is exfiltrated from our networks or systems into the hands of a malicious actor. So we have to stop data exfiltration as our grand strategy. Then we need a strategy, and it turns out zero trust is the only strategy in cybersecurity. If you want to think strategically about cybersecurity, you must adopt zero trust. You don't have any other choice. There are no other strategies. Then we have tactics, the tools and techniques that everybody focuses on, and of course, operations, the platform and the policies. So let's start with grand strategy. Why do I say stopping data breaches is the grand strategy of cybersecurity? Well, it's because of a data breach called the Target data breach. This happened in December of 2013. I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but a major retail outlet in the United States had 110 million credit cards stolen. This is actually when cybersecurity began. Everything before this event is what I call BT, or before Target. We're now in the year 8 AT, or 8 after Target. The cybersecurity industry is only about 8 years old because everything changed because of Target. For the first time in history, the CEO was fired by something that IT did or didn't do, which was allow a data breach. And if there is a data breach in your organization, you have policies in place which allowed it to happen. The unique thing about cybersecurity is you're not necessarily a victim. You're usually a co-participant with the malicious actor because of poor policies and poor security controls. And that's different than in human crime. So we need to think about, how are we building these policies? How are we designing these systems to protect from this grand strategic action, which is getting the CEO fired? And the data breach is the only thing that can get a CEO fired. CEOs get fired for data breaches all the time. They don't get fired for ransomware attacks. They fire somebody for ransomware attacks. So again, it's the grand strategic resonance that we're worried about. Now, there was a big data breach in the U.S. called the OPM data breach. This stands for the Office of Personnel Management. This database contained over 22 million people who had top secret clearances in the United States. This is functionally the list of spies of the government. So if you have ever seen the movie Mission Impossible 1 with Tom Cruise, where he's trying to steal the NOC list, the non-operational covers list, and he hangs upside down on that funky trapeze in that really special room that is so sensitive that he has to catch a bead of sweat, because if it dropped and hit the floor, alarms would go off. Well, guess what? That room didn't exist, and he didn't need to learn how to use this funky trapeze. He just needed some basic SQL injection hacking skills, and he could have stolen the NOC list like it was stolen by a nation state, which led to the dismissal of the head of this agency, a woman named Catherine Archuleta, and it led to an investigation by the United States Congress called the OPM data breach: how the government jeopardized our national security for more than a generation. The point of this is to say that you can't just go out to the job board on Spies R Us and get new spies in these countries that have now either ejected people or killed people because they found out that they were a spy for the United States government. And in this report, the Congress of the United States said this: OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, should provide guidance to agencies to promote a zero trust IT security model. And they did this in January of 2022. So it just took 6 years to do it, but it finally got done. So I'm starting to show you the history of zero trust and how it got to be at the forefront. And it's because the U.S. federal government recognized that had zero trust been in place during in this environment, this highly sensitive environment, that it would have increased the ability of the attackers to steal this data, and probably the data would not have been stolen. So now we get into strategy, and how can I say that zero trust is the world's only cybersecurity strategy? Well, let's look at the things that you have tended to think are strategic. The first one is defense in depth. So a friend of mine, Rick Holland, calls this expense in depth. This is, you spend money you don't have on things you don't need because you don't know what you're supposed to protect in the first place. If it's about buying enough stuff, you've bought enough stuff. If it's about spending enough money, you've spent enough money. You just have bought the wrong things and put it in the wrong places for the wrong reasons. And you thought that if you just bought enough of it and put it around everywhere, oh, well, eventually we'll catch something. Didn't work. It's not defense in depth. Defense in depth doesn't work. It's just expense in depth. And then there's compliance. Compliance is an awful thing for cybersecurity. Compliance actually makes us less secure because there's too many compliance mandates. They're kind of designed by people who don't understand cybersecurity. They cause a lot of paperwork, and they often overlap and cancel each other out. So if you're compliant to one thing, you maybe aren't compliant to something else, and it's a really difficult thing to do. I told one of the authors of that congressional report, one of the congressmen who wrote that, when I met with him, I told him I thought the number one problem was too many compliance mandates. And you see that every place, they just keep cranking them out like rabbits. It's crazy. And then we have best of breed. Oh, you should do best of breed. Buy the best thing. According to the analyst firms, use those quadrant methodologies to determine which one is best. Well, when I was at Forrester, I refused to do one of those quadrant methodologies because looking at cybersecurity from that individual product perspective is the absolutely wrong way to do cybersecurity. Cybersecurity must be thought of as a system that works together seamlessly and holistically, not a collection of independent technologies that don't talk to each other. Doesn't matter how good they are. If the endpoint security solution doesn't talk to the firewall, it provides almost no value to the organization. So if you have a best of breed mentality, all you're doing is creating more expense in depth. And then we have my joke strategy. I call it hope because I think most people just hope they don't get breached, right? The H stands for put your head in the sand, pretend like nothing's wrong. O is obfuscate reality. Pretend like it's not as bad as it seems. You know, things it'll work out. And then, well, that didn't happen. So we're going to point the finger at somebody else. You saw this with Equifax and with SolarWinds, where they blame somebody. They blame some poor administrator of something and say, you didn't do this, when that person probably wanted to do the right thing, but certainly weren't allowed to do the right thing. And this leads to E, the employment journey. Getting fired, the CEO of Target, the head of OPM, the CEO of Equifax, the CEO of TalkTalk, Ashley Madison, Sony. There's a long list of CEOs who've gotten fired. There's a few of them, like SolarWinds, where the person retired right before the breach was discovered. Those are fun. And you can always look and see when somebody retires and then something happens right after that. I don't want to be known as the guy who got fired. I'll just retire, which is probably a good strategy. You can see that too in CISOs. If you watch CISOs, and if you see a CISO who's a high-profile CISO suddenly retire and decide they're going to do something completely different, you can have some level of confidence that something bad happened that they didn't want to put their name to. So these things are all tactics. They're not strategies. We've been doing tactics for too long. We need to do strategies if we need to do strategic thinking if we are going to solve this problem. So this comes down to zero trust. Well, what is zero trust? I've already given you the exact definition, so let's look at trust. What's trust? Well, trust is a phenomenally difficult thing to define. You can't define it. I could give you a long treatise about it, but it probably isn't very valuable right now. But I will tell you that trust is a human emotion. Did you hear that? A human emotion that we've injected into digital systems for absolutely no reason at all. We don't know why we use this word trust, but we do, and it causes problems because trust is actually a vulnerability. A very dangerous vulnerability. In fact, it's the most dangerous vulnerability because it's the only vulnerability that is also an exploit at the same time. So the only entity who gets value from trust in your organization are the malicious actors who are going to exploit it. Think about this for a second. Trust in your organization doesn't provide any value to you as the owner of the system. That should scare you. So we need to get rid of trust because this old trust model where the untrusted side went to the evil internet and the trusted side of the technology went to the internal network is the problem. We all know that malware can cross over to this trusted side, right? And we can get some malware over here on this side of the network. I hope you can see my cursor there. because I'm not able to draw. Usually I draw, but we're not, the translation makes it so that I can't. So if I can get my malware over there, bad things are going to happen. We all agree on that. Well, what's malware? That's a good question. Well, malware is a clump of packets all combined together that do something. Well, what's a packet? Well, a packet is a collection of ones and zeros represented by electrons or photons. So if I can get my photon over onto your piece of fiber optic cable, you're suddenly going to give that photon elevated privileges and attributes of trust based upon the location of a photon? Totally insane. And then we have malicious insiders. There are two people that are so famous, I call them the Beyonce and the Madonna of cybersecurity. They're so famous they have one-word names. Snowden, Manning, you recognize those names. They were trusted users on trusted devices. They had the right endpoint protection. They had the right patch levels. They had robust identity systems and powerful multi-factor authentication systems, but no one looked at their packets post-authentication. And this is why they were able to steal the data they did. What was the exploit technique that they used to compromise these highly sensitive government networks and steal sensitive data? They compromised trust. That was their attack vector, the trust model. So we need to eliminate trust. No more trusted packets, no more trusted users, no more trusted systems, no more trusted devices. We just need to eliminate trust when we talk about digital systems. Trust is a four-letter word. But people will often accuse me of saying, oh, John, you're saying people aren't trustworthy, and I am absolutely not saying that at all. I am saying something much more profound. I am saying people are not packets. No person has ever been on a network. It is the anthropomorphization of the network that is killing us. The idea that John is on the network right now, well, I'm not. I'm sitting in my nice, easy chair here in Dallas, Texas. I haven't shrunken down into a subatomic particle where I've been transferred over the public internet to the Teams server so I can appear on that computer and then transferred with a bunch of wires to the projector. That hasn't happened to me. And it hasn't happened to you either. You've never been on a network either. In fact, no person has ever been on a network. Even in the movies, it's rare. Maybe Tron, Lawnmower Man. I've heard Wreck-It Ralph. I haven't seen Wreck-It Ralph, but they say that they tell me that's one that somebody's on the network. But remember, even in the Matrix, they got to plug in, right? So people are not packets. Understand this. This is so fundamental. Zero trust isn't about people. It's about packets. Now, I said zero trust is very simple. There's only 9 things you need to know. The 4 design concepts I'm going to talk about now, and then the 5-step model that I've already mentioned. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to focus on the business outcomes. What is the business trying to achieve? If we don't know the answer to that, we will never be successful. And this is how we align with grand strategy. So what is the business trying to achieve? Second, we need to design from the inside out instead of the outside in. All the networks we have today, all the ways we learned to design networks, were designed from the edges in. We started with our handoff to the internet and design inward, and we never actually got around to designing the protection around the stuff that really mattered. The third thing we need to do is determine who or what needs to have access. Need to know, least privilege, right? We need to make sure that we have a high degree of validation on the users that are allowed in there and give them only access to stuff that they need to know. We give too much access to too many people for no reason at all except because there was a broken trust model. And then finally, we need to inspect all the traffic and log it all and make decisions in real time up at layer 7 so that we can have a layer 7 policy. Ultimately, zero trust is a layer 7 policy statement. I just need layer 7 controls in order to enforce layer 7 policy. Now, the best way I can show you on how this works is to show you how the U.S. Secret Service protects the President of the United States. This is an image from President Barack Obama's 2009 inauguration event. And there are three things that the Secret Service knows about the President of the United States that we do not know about the data or assets that we are protecting. First, they know who the president is. They don't do presidential discovery projects. They don't scan for the president, do they? No, they don't. And they know where the president is at all times. They never go, hey, we've lost the president. Where is he? They know where the president is. And third, they know who should have access to the president at any given time. These are the three fundamental questions you must ask if you are going to protect anything, whether it is data, assets, or the president of the United States. Now, if we look at this image, we can see that, yes, they did have a perimeter that day, January 20th, 2009. But let's look at this uniformed Secret Service agent right here. If you can see my cursor, you can see that he has he has his hands in his pockets. He has a hat on. Looks like his coat is zipped up to me. They all look like they're trying to keep warm because it was cold out that day. January in Washington, D.C. is cold, let me tell you. And so they know that they're not doing any real protection. They're not ready for anything. They're there to intimidate, to do a little security theater. No, the real protection is being done down at the bottom of the screen at what I call the protect surface. The protect surface is the fundamental tactical concept of zero trust that you must understand if you're going to get this concept. What we can do is we can take the overall attack surface, shrink it down orders of magnitude to something that is very small and easily known, and that is called a protect surface. So on this day, it didn't matter how many people are on the streets in the town looking at this parade. Only 4 people mattered: the president, his wife, and his 2 children. That's the protect surface. That's it. Everybody else doesn't matter. So if at the end of the day, those 4 people are left alive, the Secret Service has done their job. Now, we're going to see the Secret Service do something really, really amazing. Watch closely. They're going to move their controls in adjacent to the protect surface. They put the controls as close as possible to the thing they're trying to protect. We don't do that in cybersecurity. Our controls are out here on the perimeter or out on the endpoint. Even worse, they're as far away as we can possibly get them from the thing we're trying to protect. And this creates a secondary attack surface that we call the internal network. Just yesterday or the day before, we found out that someplace, I can't even remember the news story, but there was an attacker in there for 9 months. That's what we call dwell time. We should have a dwell time of 0 if we put the controls in the correct place, but we don't. We typically put them in the completely wrong place. We couldn't be more wrong in our placement of controls if we actually tried to be wrong. So we must have our controls as close as possible to the protect surface so we can define a microperimeter in layer 7 policy. And I say layer 7 because we're getting into this place where a lot of people are deploying old layer 3 stateless ACLs, access control lists, and every single attacker knows how to get past this. I was talking to one of the original pen testers not too long ago, and he said, man, this feels like 1998 to me. All these controls, these native controls in clouds and in certain things, they're just important protocol layer 3 controls, right? And there is no layer 4. Layer 4 is metadata about layer 3. So, these controls are so basic that everybody can get through them. And so we've lost history, the lessons of history. And we're making things less safe as we go along because it's easier to be less safe than it is to be more safe. So once they have the controls in place, they can define policy. The policy at this moment is there are only 2 people right here, these 2 Secret Service agents in the front of the vehicle, the Beast, which, by the way, is merely transport. It's not the protect surface. Sometimes they're going to be in the airplane. Sometimes they're going to be in the helicopter. Sometimes they're going to be in the limousine. Sometimes they're going to be walking. But they are always the protect surface, the family, and there's always a microperimeter surrounding them. So at this moment, only 2 people can transit outbound of the microperimeter. Only 2. And exactly 0 people can come inbound of the microperimeter. If we look at this Secret Service agent at the bottom of the screen, he doesn't have gloves on. His hands aren't in his pockets. He doesn't have a hat on. He doesn't have his coat buttoned. Why? Because he's ready for action. And underneath his coat, and I've been around a Secret Service detail, underneath his coat is a layer 7 control. So if anybody comes running out trying to get inside there, they are going to be denied. And they are going to be violently denied. You see, all policy is binary. There's only 2 things you can do. You can either allow or deny. And you can have multiple criteria on why you do something. And in Zero Trust, we really just allow. There's a default deny. So if you do nothing, it's a deny. And you have to actually, the only policy we make is to allow something to happen. Allow a connection to happen. Now, the Secret Service doesn't stop there. I hit the button a little early. Sorry about that. Let's let it build up. A little more drama. We can see that they continuously monitor and update everything in real time. So they look out into the audience. They see this guy in white. I always pick on him because he stands out. Oh, he looks a little sketchy. You know, he doesn't have a jacket on, maybe. Who knows why, but he looks sketchy. So we're going to tell everybody, keep an eye out on it. This is a little bit of threat intelligence. And the other thing that could happen is they could get a message and hey, we've got an important person that needs to get in. We're going to change the inbound policy, right? So the policy is very small in a Zero Trust environment. It's typically 7 to 10 times smaller than your traditional hierarchical policies. And this makes it easier to manage as well. So this is Zero Trust. The Secret Service does a Zero Trust version of executive protection. And this is the best visual metaphor I can give you on how we need to protect your sensitive data and assets. I always ask, where is your president? Where is the thing that needs to be protected in your organization? And now we get into the tools and techniques because, of course, we need ways to do this. So you need to think of this as a journey. And so your journey is going to begin with the first step. Now, this is a picture from what's called the Fjord Stairs in Licencias in Norway. This is very near to where my grandfather was born. He was born in Norway, and on an island in the fjord near where he was born, there is the world's longest set of wooden steps called the Fjord Stairs. There's 4,444 of these steps, and people come from all over the world to climb those steps. It's on a lot of people's bucket list, but when I got up about, right here, it wasn't on my bucket list anymore because I thought if I went all the way to the top, I might kick the bucket. But I realized as I was standing there that this mountain right here was hollowed out by hand at the turn of the 20th century in the early 1900s. And every day, people had to carry things like 50-kilogram bags of concrete and huge heavy metal pieces of equipment up these stairs in order to get them at the top of the mountain so that they could be put inside. And I thought about the people who would be willing to carry a 50-kilogram bag of concrete up 4,444 stairs. How did they do it? And they did it by not thinking about the 4,000th step or the 3,000th step or even the 1,000th step. They thought about it by thinking about the first step and then the second step and then the third step and then the fourth step. So you start your journey step by step. And my 5-step methodology can guide that journey. So the first thing you're going to need to do is define the protect surface. Ask the question, what do we need to protect? This is not done very much because we're so focused on technology all the time. So I'm in these calls with people. Where do I put this widget, this product? Where do I, should I buy this version of it or that version of it? Which vendor should I do? I don't know the answer to that because I need to know, what are you going to protect? That's the first question. And I ask that, what are you protecting? And they go, oh, well, we haven't thought about that. We just want to know where to put the widget. Well, that's why this system isn't working, folks, because you care about buying widgets and not protecting things. So you have to define the protect surface. What goes in a protect surface? I'm glad you asked. Thank you. DAS elements. So I created a simple acronym that help you remember what can go into a protect surface, a DAS element. It stands for data, applications, assets, or services. So you take a single DAS element, maybe a single data type like credit card data for PCI. So we're building a cardholder data network. We're going to put the credit card data inside the protect surface and build out the protect surface one DAS element at a time. And by doing this, following this 5-step journey, we can start building these out one protect surface at a time. So we can do this incrementally, iteratively, and non-disruptively. Now, once we know what we need to protect, we then have to understand how it works together as a system. And we do that by mapping the transaction flows, understanding the system. And then that system will tell us where do we put the stuff. That's when we do the architecture. You see, every zero trust environment is custom built for the protect surface that it's protecting. You can't just have a cookie cutter approach to zero trust, because the cookie cutter approach we've had for the last 20 or 30 years hasn't worked. So we need to throw that cookie cutter in the trash, because it is trash, and focus on actually protecting something in a tailor-made way. Now, the fourth step is defining policy. Create that zero trust policy. I'll talk about that in more detail in a moment. And then finally, we monitor and maintain. That's what I focus on. I do zero trust managed services. And by doing it this way, we can prevent data breaches, prevent attacks from being successful, but we can create a feedback loop that makes this stronger and stronger over time. So it's very exciting part of this journey. This is all part of my journey to move from thinking about the concept to building these environments to understanding how to manage them more simply to make it easy for people to consume as a service. Now, a lot of people start their zero trust journey through a segmentation project. And I will ask them, why are you segmenting? And they'll say, we had an audit finding that told us that we should segment. No. That's not why you're segmenting. I asked why you're segmenting. That might be the compelling event that forces you to segment, but the only reason to segment a network is to protect something, and that is why you always start with a protect surface. So this is a CDE or cardholder data environment. That means the DAS element is PCI or credit card data. So now we understand why we are segmenting. I was in London right before the pandemic, and the CIO of one of the world's largest companies stopped me right here, and he says, oh, I see why our 3-year, $2 million segmentation project failed. It failed because we didn't even know why we were doing it. That's right. You didn't know why you were doing it. You were just doing it because someone said you should. And then we take a segmentation gateway, a gateway that segments networks layers 2 through 7 based upon users, applications, or data to define a micro perimeter in policy. Typically, segmentation gateways are some sort of next generation firewall today. They can be PSGs, physical segmentation gateways, or VSGs, virtual segmentation gateways. And those are used intermingled throughout various environments because we can do zero trust in any environment. An on-premise network, in a public cloud, in a private cloud, on the endpoint, it doesn't matter. It just matters about the protect surface. So once we know that, we understand how we're enforcing that segmentation up at layer 7. Now, by adding centralized management, this is essentially the reference architecture for zero trust. And we're just going to do this over and over again by adding different protect surfaces to the system, again, so we can build it out incrementally, iteratively, and by doing that, make it non-disruptive to our business. Now we get into the operations, the platforms, and the policies. I'm a big movie fan. There's a movie called The Imitation Game. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but if you haven't, I hope that after this you'll go and watch it with your cybersecurity hat on. It's about breaking the Nazi Enigma code during World War II. And it's about a specific man named Alan Turing, who is really the father of modern computing. And he created this machine here, this analog computer called the Bombe, B-O-M-B-E, to break the Nazi Enigma code. And there's a scene in the movie that was really profound to me. It really hit me hard, when people are trying to tear this machine down because they want more of the 3 Ps of analysis of the day: people, pencils, and paper. And he said, no, no, no. What if only a machine can defeat another machine? And he was so precisely profound on that. Only machines can defeat other machines, and our attackers are a highly sophisticated machine, and we need to build machines to defeat the machine. And that's what I'm doing at Onto It. I'm working on systems that build machines to defeat other machines as a managed service. So what we can do is you, as a customer, interface with the machine through policy. And I've created a thing called the Kipling method of zero trust rule writing. So Rudyard Kipling gave us the idea of who, what, when, where, why, and how in a poem in 1902. And every culture, every language has this concept of who, what, when, where, why, and how. And so we can use this to easily create policy that's easy to create, right? But it's easy to read, it's easy to understand, and it's easy to audit. So by defining these statements, who, what, when, where, why, and how, we can turn them into policy. So we can say, we want to create a policy for Salesforce, going to Salesforce. So we need to know who should be allowed to go to Salesforce. Well, that's people in the sales user group. So perhaps we take the OUs in Active Directory for salespeople, sales managers, and sales admins, and we create this special group called sales. And then that group exists as a layer 7 statement in the policy, and we can then add some authentication type, multi-factor authentication to that to make it highly validated. Next, we need to know what is the application ID, right? The what statement. What is this application? Because if we just say 80 and 443, well, attackers can go through that. So we have to have a layer 7 version of that what statement. And that's what we're trying to do is move higher up into the stack. And then we can have time limitations via when statements, which we should do more of. And we need to have a where statement. This is the old destination IP, but we can have deeper understandings of this, the US version of the Salesforce cloud, for example. And then we can have why statements. This is typically metadata about classification. We don't do enough data classification in our business. And finally, we have a how statement that defines the criteria. We can say that the criteria must be that this traffic must go through some sort of IPS. It must be decrypted. We won't need URL filtering because this rule will never allow the surfing of the public internet, even if it traverses the public internet. We'll have some sandboxing and probably some DLP. And if all of those criteria are met, then we will allow the traffic, or else the standard default deny rule will be still in place. So this is how we write policy for zero trust: who, what, when, where, why, and how. And so this is what I am doing in my practice as a managed service to build systems that automate this process in a unique way. And I have no idea why it's stretching out here in this PowerPoint for the web thing that I'm doing. But the idea is zero trust as a service makes zero trust easy to consume. So you can see here what we do is we manage the protect surfaces. There's technology in the background, but we've defined all the protect surfaces, and we have the 5-step model up here, and then we can track the maturity of any protect surface in the whole system itself to understand how well you're doing. Now, where do you start? That's a very common question. And so I created, actually in the Pentagon, I was in the Pentagon doing this for the United States military. I created a thing called the Zero Trust Learning Curve, where we look at the sensitivity or criticality of the protect surface versus the time on the zero trust journey. And this creates a curve where we look at everything on a per protect surface basis. And a reminder that every protect surface contains a single DAS element. So we build this out one protect surface at a time. So early on, we're going to work on low sensitivity systems that have low sensitivity systems, so that if you make a mistake, you start over again. No big deal, no harm, no foul, right? And then we'll work on systems that are a little more sensitive, and I call these practice protect surfaces. You get to zero trust the same way you get to Carnegie Hall. You practice, practice, practice. And once you've done that, you can focus on the crown jewels, the keys to the kingdom, the high value assets, whatever you call them in your organization. And after that is done, your work's not finished. You're going to retrofit some other stuff into the system, and you're going to take every new system that comes in and put it into a zero trust environment. But there will always be a threshold that you can define that says everything below this level of sensitivity isn't important enough to go into zero trust. So zero trust isn't all or nothing. There are things that just don't need to be protected that much, but you need to understand which things need a massive amount of protection and which things don't. And then finally, we can do this maturity model where we track every protect surface. So we label the protect surface, cardholder data environment, and the DAS element, PCI. And then using our 5-step model, we have a 5-step standard 5-step maturity model. So we can say, well, we're at a maturity level, we can add up these scores, and maybe it says 9. And we know that we want all 4s. So 4 times 5 is 20. So we can have a project that says we want to get to 20 on this over the course of the next 90 days or 180 days, whatever it is. And project managers can use this to track the maturity and then give this maturity score up to the business so they can understand how well we're doing in cybersecurity, because up until now, you can't have answered that question very easily. So I want to leave you with one last thought. So after this congressional report on OPM was delivered, one of the Congress people who wrote that actually wrote a bylined article called Adopting a Zero Trust Cyber Model in Government, where he said zero trust would have profoundly limited the attacker's ability to move within OPM's network and access such sensitive data. This is why zero trust is a strategy, because it resonated up to a sitting congressman in the United States House of Representatives. That's an unimaginable thing. Nothing like this has ever happened before in the world of cybersecurity. Okay, so that's my time. I believe, and I want to confirm this, please, that at this point I am supposed to switch over to another Teams meeting for the question and answer portion of the event.
Hello, John. We actually understand that you have a kind of a tight schedule. I don't know if you have enough time for the questions. If you can spare some minutes, that would be great. If you can,
no, I have time. I just needed to be done at 9:30 Central Time, so I've got a half hour. Everything's working out on time, so yay! Thank you.
All right, awesome. Well, then,
so do you want me to stay on this call, or do you want me to jump on the other one?
Let's jump on the other one. Thank you very much for first of all, let me just say thank you very much for the fascinating presentation, full of this amazing concept and groundbreaking things that are not really groundbreaking when you think of them until you finally open your eyes. So thank you very much for the enlightenment. We'll be sure to let you know of all of the questions. I will actually start projecting this. To all of the people that are accompanying us in the live stream, please be sure to do this. Just scan in the QR code or go to this URL, and we'll be sure to give the presentation questions to John. Un poco en español. Muchísimas gracias a todos los que están ahorita en el live stream. Pueden hacerle llegar sus preguntas a John ahorita en este link que está en la pantalla que le estamos compartiendo. También se escanea el código QR, les podemos hacer llegar las preguntas y con mucho gusto vamos a empezar a contestarlas. Le hacemos llegar la respuesta. Muchísimas gracias por conectarse. Esperemos que hayan disfrutado muchísimo de esta transmisión en vivo, de la presentación de Jesús y de John, que puedan haber seguido con muchas ideas nuevas y muchos planes para mejorar. Con obviamente el recordatorio de que estamos aquí en Secnesys, proveyendo como siempre en estos eventos de gran calidad esta clase de personajes tan icónicos en la ciberseguridad. Esperamos entonces que todo el mundo haya tenido un gran momento en esta noche. Esperamos sus preguntas con mucho entusiasmo y esperamos que se unan en los siguientes eventos de Secnesys. Muchísimas gracias y buenas noches.